nice angles
Very
to them.
cool.
But there were also some very good benches done by Humphrey Eichen at the same time, quite wide and broad seating. No suggestion there that you couldn't lie down on it. So,
No.
but the one important thing about the originals at Lady Norwood Rose Garden is the planks have been replaced by flat planks. And I think that was just a cheap jack way of renovating them without following the original design. And
Michael,
I think that's
very
bad.
Yeah, very bad. That is us. Thanks for your time, and a big thank you to Ruth, Money and Peter Field. Kia ora to you both. Been fantastic. I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow afternoon from 3:45pm. Lisa Owen and Checkpoint is next.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. Air Haere Aki nei, buckle up, airfares could be about to take off. Air New Zealand's profits are down a whopping 39%. It's blaming inflation and fuel costs. The boss, Greg Foran, joins us in the studio. The supermarket that's counting up, not down. The rat bodies are piling up at the Dunedin store that's been closed almost 2 weeks. If you are waiting for an Auckland commuter train tonight, get comfy. You could be a while. KiwiRail's here to explain why. The highway closure that could see some northland businesses on the road to nowhere. And all this talk about tipping has tipped some of you over the edge. Don't forget, you can watch us live on the RNZ website, Facebook and Freeview Channel 50. RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Tēnā tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. A Dunedin teacher who stabbed her partner 22 times while he was in the bath tried to drug him first. Carol Code has been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 11 years behind bars in the Dunedin High Court today for the murder of 58-year-old director Mark Henry Willis on May the 18th last year. Justice Lisa Preston says Code tried to kill him twice before that day.
You attempted to surreptitiously drug Mr. Willis so he would fall asleep in the bath and die. When that didn't succeed, as Mr. Willis noticed the unpleasant taste, you checked that he was in the bath before returning to the kitchen to get the knife you used in the attack.
Defence counsel Sarah Saunderson-Warner says the murder went against Carol Code's character as a loving and devoted mother and showed she was severely mentally unwell. 5 schools in Taupo are in lockdown and the hospital and several streets are cordoned off with a police manhunt underway. Police are asking all residents in the hilltop area to stay inside and for everyone else to avoid the area. Locals report helicopters and sirens within the last hour. The police say schools are in lockdown as a precaution. The hospital is within the cordon, but police are allowing people through if they need to go there. Relatives of the 115 people killed in the CTV building were among those to join a memorial ceremony today, marking the 13th anniversary of the devastating Christchurch earthquake. The February 22nd earthquake killed 185 people and caused widespread destruction. David Selway's sister Susan was working as a psychologist in the CTV building when the quake hit just before 1 p.m. He says families like his are still looking for justice more than a decade on.
And I'm sure she would have faced that adversity, that moment of absolute panic with great strength. So it's the nature of the person she was. So yeah, it's sad that people died unnecessarily.
The Child Poverty Action Group doesn't trust that the government has any real interest in reducing child poverty. New Stats NZ data shows an increase in 3 of the 9 child poverty measures in the year ending June 2023. That includes a rise of 23,000 children going without household essentials, such as quality shoes and doctor's visits. Group spokesperson Mike O'Brien says the government's focus on the cost of living isn't a commitment to ending poverty.
This is not just a cost of living and inflation kind of issue. That won't cut the mustard. It needs a really solid commitment to reducing child poverty.
Mike O'Brien wants to see the coalition urgently readjust benefit levels. An Otaki mechanic says it's likely someone accidentally mixed diesel in the 98 grade fuel at a local petrol station. BP Connect in Otaki has admitted a problem with the fuel it sold as 98 on Tuesday, but won't elaborate. Chris Anton from nearby Anton's Automotives says a customer brought in a car that day complaining of low power, shuddering and rattling noise.
I serviced his car on Monday, and one of the things I did was check the spark plugs, and they look quite clean and new. When I first looked at it, when he came back with the wrong fuel, pulled one of the spark plugs out, and it was caked with carbon, and it actually smelt like diesel on the spark plugs.
The capture of another rat at the Countdown store in South Dunedin has pushed back its planned reopening date. Woolworths New Zealand Director of Stores, Jason Stockhill, says the store will reopen on Sunday if no more rodents are caught before tomorrow morning. Wall cladding was removed today and uncovered evidence of old rat nests, but no signs of live nests.
What we wanted to do was make sure we did everything possible when we kept having these sightings, and particularly this last few days with the 1 and 2 that we were catching. We decided to start taking the cladding off to really have a look behind the walls, because that's what you can't get behind, and that's where we found what we found this morning.
24 rats have been caught in just under 2 weeks. To sport now, and the Black Caps' confidence hasn't been dented despite the deflating last ball loss Australia in the opening T20 in Wellington. I think I'm missing a word. Last night.
To Australia.
Thank you. Black Caps batter Rachin Ravindra says they know what needs to change.
There's definitely some bits that we didn't do as well, tidy up the fielding a little bit and sort of little execution things that we could have done a little bit better. But look, that's the beauty of T20 cricket, and that's the nature of the game. Moments happen, it's 2-3 balls, and they played a really good game, especially sort of the back end and the power that they have. So I think we just got to stay in it.
Game 2 is tomorrow night in Auckland. Super Rugby Pacific kicks off tomorrow when last year's runners-up, the Chiefs, host the defending champs, the Crusaders. Chiefs captain Luke Jacobson says while last season's narrow final loss will be a motivator, the chance to impress new All Black coach Scott Robertson at the start of a new World Cup cycle will also be at the forefront of players' minds.
I guess you go out to impress every year, but I guess there's new coaches in, and the idea for me is just play as well as I can at Super, and everything else will take care of itself, so hopefully they like what they see.
Meanwhile, World Cup winning Black Ferns Ruahe Dumont and Maya Roos have been named as co-captains for the Blues Super Rugby Aupiki side. And New Zealand will have representation in all 3 equestrian disciplines at this year's Paris Olympics. Individual show jumping and dressage spots have been confirmed from rankings, while the eventing team spot had already been confirmed. Koinanga Pitupitu Kōrero. That's the news.
Meripeka Raukawa Tate hits out at Oranga Tamariki after another scathing report.
The oversight is lacking, the commitment to make things better is lacking, and it really is the lack of respect for the children.
The Woolworths boss steps down days after a botched interview.
I think the general public has put the dots together and said 1 + 1 = 3.
And American car fanatics take over Taranaki.
I built it out of just bits and pieces of cars that I didn't run over with my diggers way back then. Just seeing if I could make a car out of like 7 or 8 different cars.
Fueling your day. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're back on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday for Northland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Cloudy periods with isolated showers, possibly heavy and thundery later tomorrow. Auckland to Kapiti Coast, including central high country. Showers spreading south today, clearing to fine tomorrow from the afternoon. For Gisborne, cloud clearing today, scattered rain tomorrow. Hawke's Bay, Waded Upper and Wellington, fine today. A shower or 2 north of Dannevirke later tomorrow. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Westland, mainly fine. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, except Rakiura, Stewart Island, fine but low cloud developing in the east this evening, clearing tomorrow morning. High cloud increasing later tomorrow. Fiordland and Stewart Island, cloudy with occasional drizzle, mainly about the fjords, and Chatham Islands, cloudy. It is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have traffic news and more headlines for you at 5:20. Kia ora rā e ho, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpointi tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Brace for potential Air New Zealand price hikes. The national carrier's half-year profit plummeted 39% on the same period last year, but that's still an after-tax profit of $129 million. It's warning the second half of the year will be bumpy too. The airline says it's been hit by inflation, rising fuel prices and engine maintenance issues. That's despite passenger revenue cracking $3 billion, a jump of 21%, largely due to long-haul flights. Well, joining me now in the studio is Air New Zealand boss Greg Foran. Top of mind for many people, are prices going up?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yeah, I'll get to that. I think we had a pretty exceptional year last year, so what we're seeing is a little bit more of a normalisation of where we sit. Averages are misleading, so what we've done is had a look at the business, and what we're seeing is that in terms of our domestic business, fares actually have been kept down pretty much for the last year. You can see that in the Department of Statistics. At the same time, we're dealing with some pretty significant inflation, so what we'll be doing is just sensibly going through, and instead of absorbing as much of the inflation as we have, we'll need to pass some of that on.
So that's a yes, prices are going up.
For domestic, we're pretty comfortable with how we're looking across the Tasman, Pacific Islands. And of course, what we're seeing in long haul is a situation where out of North America, we're actually seeing prices come down pretty significantly as we've got a lot of capacity in there. So it's not a blanket statement. It's not an approach that says everything's going up by X percent. It's just us sensibly realigning the business based on where we see pressure points.
Well, you've indicated, obviously, inflation is adding ongoing pressure for you. That's sitting at around 5%. What size price rises can people anticipate?
Well, as I said, it's going to vary depending on how we manage that. You could give me an example. Well, we manage that basically through our pricing. One of the things we'll also look at is ancillary. So, you know, how much does it cost for someone to take their pet, or what is it for an excess, you know, an extra bag? So we'll just sensibly look at that. As I said, we've been, you know, very careful to keep pricing very reasonable during this period, because we've been incurred with, you know, covering some pretty significant inflation numbers. Now's the time to get a bit of that back.
Okay, well, how much? I mean, saying that and indicating that will be spooking people who are listening. So are you talking about on particular routes domestically, across all routes? Give us some more detail.
Yeah, look, it depends really on how the capacity plays out, because what you don't want to do here is just apply a blanket approach. You know, if there's more demand in a particular area, then you can often get a little bit more pricing out. If there's less demand, the last thing you want to be doing is flying empty planes. So it's a sensible, measured approach. And, you know, what I try to be all the way through this is very transparent about how things are going. As I said, we're pretty happy with our position at the half. As we look ahead, we can see a bit of pressure coming onto us in terms of coming out of corporate and government, in terms of those sort of bookings as they tighten up. So we need to start getting ourselves prepared around that.
Yeah, so how much do you need to get clawback through domestic airfares?
Well, as I said, we look at that very surgically, and it's a situation of us saying, where do we think we can just eke a little bit more out? It's about fine-tuning the experience. My margins out of the moment in the domestic business are considerably less than what they were pre-COVID.
Can you give us the numbers?
It's not something that we disclose, Lisa, to the market. We don't break our profit down like that to that extent.
How can people assess whether you're being fair and reasonable as you say you are? Because a lot of people already think you're very toppy on price.
Yeah, look, the same way that they do at the moment, they generally compare us either to a competitor, if a competitor's flying that route, or the cost for travelling in a car. So, you know, we measure that. We have a look at what demand we're getting and how things are going. So that's how they measure it.
How soon can people expect to see prices go up?
We're starting to manage some of that in domestic already in terms of some of those other items that I was talking about.
What does that mean, manage it? Does that mean you're already raising prices on domestic
in
routes?
some areas, yeah.
Which ones?
wherever we can actually see that it makes sense to do so, and we can manage that appropriately.
So which ones are you currently seeing it makes sense and you have moved on already adjusting your prices?
We fly to 20 domestic ports, so it's a moving feast, and airline pricing.
You're not being very transparent about this, because what you're telling me now is you've already started raising prices because you need to get some more money back, and you're already raising prices on some domestic routes, but you won't come clean about which ones.
Because it's very difficult to actually pin something down on airline pricing, Lisa. And you look at a website and you look at a price.
You must know where your money's coming from.
We measure each particular route each month, and it's something that we've just begun, and we'll continue to work our way through that.
Right. From this day on, people can expect your airfares to go up domestically.
They can.
How do you think the market is going to react to that in terms of your customers?
Well, once again, Lisa, what they'll do is they'll make that particular comparison in terms of the value equation. There's no point in us running a business domestically where we're not making the sort of returns that we need to reinvest back in the business.
But if you're making profit overall, why sting your local people?
Well, as I've shared with you previously, Lisa, you might say, gee, a profit of $200 million for the business, a big profit. Costs you $200 million to buy one wide-bodied plane. If you have a look at the return on invested capital, it's not a significant return. We're not in the business of running a charity, as I've said. We've got to get a return on investment. At the same time, we've got to look after our customers. So while we're talking about pricing, let's also not forget that during this period, not only have we been holding prices down domestically, but we've been improving the experience for customers, and that's something that we also measure and also share.
Okay, well, I've heard you talking about the airport fees, right? And you have said that flying is about to become unaffordable. Isn't it already unaffordable?
Compared to what is one of the questions that you need to ask yourself. If you're trying to get down to Christchurch from here, are you better to drive down and catch a ferry and continue driving, or are you better to jump on a plane and go? So you have to do the comparison. Customers we're finding are enjoying our experience domestically, where our revenue is actually pretty strong. As I said, the issue is we've been incurring cost in this business, haven't passed it all on. Now we need to pass some of it on. That's just the reality.
Okay.
And people are experiencing that in all manner of their goods and services in New Zealand today.
Indeed they are, but some people would argue, and whenever I talk to you, I get a flood of feedback, right? And one of the most discussed topics is the feeling that Air New Zealand is already overcharging people on domestic routes. And you are a higher-end airline compared to what else is available in the market. And in terms of people's response, they're saying, and this is one thing, somebody has said, last 5 flights have all been delayed by more than an hour. So are you offering a top-end service? What are your cancellation and delay rates like at the moment?
Actually, pretty impressive. So for last year, we were actually the 5th best airline in Asia Pacific, the best airline in Australasia. So no one touched us in New Zealand or Australia. That's independent data. And during January and February, it's actually improved again. I'm very sorry that a customer had that experience. But generally, Lisa, the experience in terms of flights leaving on time, arriving on time, the experiences is actually very, very good. And that's something that we've invested in, and we speak about that in our release, that we've been prepared to invest and we continue to deliver a good customer experience.
The other point that is raised in the material we released today, you say that the business is pulling multiple levers to mitigate the effects of inflation and these rising costs. What other things are you cutting?
Well, one of the things that we've been doing is pushing back on Auckland Airport, for example, because we know...
In your own business?
Because that's going to be a challenge.
Are you trimming any other fat in your own business? Have you got a hiring freeze, doing any of those kinds of things?
For sure, and we've had that in place for some time. So we're looking at all our costs. Yeah, so very, very tight on headcount in terms of what we need, apart from in areas where it's clear that we need them, for example, aircraft engineers. So we're very prudent about how we're spending money, taking a very responsible long-term approach to this. And, the business is actually functioning very well.
Thank you. We're going to have to leave it there. Appreciate you coming into the studio. That is the Air New Zealand CEO, Greg Foran. 17 minutes after 5. Really interested in your thoughts on that one. Text us on 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Prices are going up. Kia amo tunu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Advocates are sounding the alarm over the government's approach to ending poverty, saying it is lacking any real interest in the problem. Child poverty statistics released today found tens of thousands more children are going without household essentials. But the Minister for Child Poverty Reduction says the Coalition's focus on reducing the cost of living will help bring those numbers down. Jemima Houston reports.
Child Poverty Action Group says the government's cost of living policies will not reduce child poverty. Stats NZ says 3 out of 9 measures of child poverty have increased. That includes 23,000 more children going without household essentials such as fresh groceries and good shoes. A spokesperson for the advocacy group, Mike O'Brien, doesn't believe the coalition has any real interest in making a difference to those numbers.
This is not just a cost of living and inflation kind of issue. That won't cut the mustard. It needs a really solid commitment to reducing child poverty.
Mr O'Brien says the position of children living below the poverty line is likely worse than the data shows. That's because it's between 12 and 18 months old, capturing information from July 2022 to June 2023. He says that's why the government needs to urgently readjust benefit levels and increase family tax credits and expand that to beneficiaries.
And some real support for people on low wages. Wage rates are just, for many households, wage rates are just too low. It's as simple as that.
Child Poverty Action Group argues that despite there being no change in poverty measures for Māori and Pacific children, the government can't sit back on its laurels.
The gap between Māori and Pacific and the population as a whole, it's narrowed in one or two places. Others, it's not been any significant steps. So there really has to be a serious focus about improving the incomes and financial well-being for Māori and Pacific communities.
The Salvation Army is also concerned the coalition government doesn't have a clear enough plan to end child poverty. Spokesperson Ian Hudson says frontline food bank staff are seeing the rising material hardship statistics play out in real time. He says there was a 40% increase in demand for food parcels last year, but the cost of living is making it difficult for the charity to keep up.
People are coming to us and we don't have the food resources that we used to have to help, so it's putting a huge pressure on all around the country for our food provision. We just don't have as much as we need at the moment.
Mr Hudson says tax cut policies are disappointing and don't help people really struggling. The Commission for Children and Young People has gone so far as calling for the government to make ending child poverty a project of national significance. Mana Mokopuna Commissioner Dr Claire Ahmad says the statistics are extremely worrying.
We need to attend to the underlying drivers of poverty, and we know that right now incomes are simply not high enough for families to get by. We also know that our income support rates, they need to lift too.
All these advocates argue that the drivers of poverty are complex and require massive action by the government. But the Minister for Child Poverty Reduction says it all comes back to a high cost of living. Louise Upston says a new approach that tackles the cost crisis is needed to end poverty.
Providing tax relief, improving housing supply, making sure that those interest rates start to come down for those who have mortgages, making childcare more affordable, a range of things that we need to do that will have an impact on these child poverty rates.
The Minister says the government's top priority is reducing living costs to ensure those that rely on welfare or are on the lowest incomes are looked after.
It is 21 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Let us know your thoughts on the Air New Zealand boss telling us that he's raising the price of domestic airfares and has already started on that. 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ and the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for us to go to the headlines. Anea Iwi, mena piti kōrero.
Air New Zealand boss Greg Foran says they're dealing with significant inflation and taking a fair and sensible approach to passing on rising costs. But he told Checkpoint people can expect domestic flight prices to increase. Air New Zealand has announced an after-tax half-year profit of $129 million, 39% down on the same period last year. New statistics say 23,000 more children went without household essentials, such as fresh groceries, between July 2022 and June 2023. Minister for Child Poverty Reduction, Louise Upston, says reducing the cost of living will bring the numbers down. Central North Island school students who've been in lockdown for more than an hour have now been allowed to leave. Tauhara Primary School, Tauhara College, Taupō Intermediate School, Lake Taupō Christian School and Hilltop School all went into lockdown at the request of police amid a hunt for a person of interest. A Dunedin teacher has been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 11 years behind bars for murdering her partner by stabbing him 22 times while he was in the bath. Carol Code admitted murdering 58-year-old director Mark Henry Willis in their Tainui home last May. Defence counsel Sarah Saunderson-Warner says Code was severely mentally unwell. And Prime Minister Christopher Luxon joined a memorial ceremony today marking the 13th anniversary of the deadly 2011 Christchurch earthquake. The names of the 185 victims were read aloud and a bell tolled once for each of them. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in Auckland on the southern motorway heading north, a breakdown has been cleared between Takanini and Manukau heading north, but there may be residual delays there. Our next traffic news and headlines are at 20 to 6.
Thank you, Evie. Some of your feedback coming in already on that interview we did with Greg Foran, the boss of Air New Zealand. This listener says Air New Zealand continue to increase domestic fares as there is limited competition. No increases internationally as lots of competition there. Time for the Commerce Commission to take a look at the gouging going on with domestic fares. This one too, I'm flying from Christchurch to Rotorua for a funeral on Saturday. It's costing me $811.60 return. I can fly to the Gold Coast, Fiji, Rarotonga for less than that. It's disgusting. Someone else says flying is a privilege, not a right, and running a big business is expensive. 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ with your thoughts on that one. The Black Caps are already in must-win territory in the cricket series against Australia, but they don't think they're on the back foot. After last night's last ball loss in the opening T20, New Zealand need to win tomorrow night to keep the Chappell-Hadley series alive. And we're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. OK, so what are the Black Caps saying after that close result?
A short time ago, we spoke with Rachin Ravindra, who was the top scorer in that Black Caps innings yesterday. His 68 off 35 balls, including 6 sixes, was his highest T20 international score and continues the good form that he's been in. But for all of that good batting, even he wasn't immune from something in the field that maybe he'd like to forget. He was one of several Black Caps who dropped a catch under the Wellington wind, under the lights there last night. He called it a little bit niggly trying to catch that ball, but that's one of the areas that the Black Caps see the fielding is what they can improve against Australia going into this next game in Auckland. And if New Zealand is to level the series, they're going to need some help for Ravindra in the batting department. And he's saying that he wasn't the only one starring with the bat last night. He's come out in defence of his Wellington Firebirds teammate, Devon Conway, who scored 63.
What's the classic saying, form is strength class is permanent, but I think he's unbelievable, and I wouldn't even say it's sort of a different form. I think he's batted well, he's just been unlucky, he's got some good balls, and that's the thing about batting, it's an up and down thing, and you're going to fail more than succeed at cricket at the end of the day. So he's a great player, and I think the way he's gone about it, even sort of potentially through the supposed slump has been going to see.
And asked if we were going to see 500 runs at Eden Park with those short boundaries, considering what we'd seen in Wellington last night, Rachin Ravindra didn't completely rule it out. He did remind us of the 240 that was chased down there a couple of years ago. So he was saying they're going to go and try and put on a show. So maybe there is something to look forward to. Maybe 500 runs at Eden Park, either tomorrow night or on Sunday.
Let's talk about Tall Blacks. They're having a little bit of a problem at the moment. Explain.
So the Tall Blacks are in Taipei. They'll be playing Chinese Taipei in a FIBA Asia Cup qualifier. So the problem that they're having is that Chinese Taipei haven't exactly been forthcoming with their roster of the players they expect to see when they play them tomorrow night. little bit of... I spoke with Jordan Ngatai, who's a veteran forward for the Tall Blacks. He was a little bit bemused about what they might see. I said, I hadn't seen much of them. And he said, well, neither have I. They've been secretive about the roster. And some players do tend to miss this FIBA window. If they're playing in the NBL or in the NBA, they might want to miss it. New Zealand's not putting out their strongest side. But Ngatai was saying they've just really got no clue about who will be playing for Chinese Taipei or whether they're actually going to play the same style that they've seen from them in previous games. So even though the Tall Blacks may be some lesser known names, you could probably still find a little bit of them if you Googled them or had a bit of a search for some of their game footage. They are players that are playing in clubs and maybe aren't getting some of the game time that they would like. Opportunity to impress their club coaches, but also the Tall Blacks coach with the upcoming Olympic qualifiers. So and going to be another tight turnaround for the Tall Blacks as well, something they're very accustomed to. But after playing in Taipei tomorrow night, they come back to Auckland on Sunday and play Hong Kong in the second game of this Asia Cup qualifier window. So for them, plenty of opportunities for this 14-strong roster, but maybe we'll see as well who's just going to turn out for Chinese Taipei tomorrow.
Thank you, Felicity. That's our sports reporter, Felicity Reid there. Rats. The problem is not sorted yet. Another rodent's been captured in Dunedin South Countdown that's been closed almost 2 weeks because of an infestation. That means further delays to any reopening. The Dunedin South Countdown's been battling the unwanted intruders since October last year, but things came to a head when one rat was photographed in the deli section. The supermarkets previously said that the rats are breaking into the building rather than nesting inside. Jason Stockel from Countdown's parent company Woolworths joins us now. Kia ora, Jason.
Hi Lisa, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. This is an ongoing saga, isn't it? When is the supermarket ever going to reopen?
Yeah, but pests are a common challenge for any food environment, and especially in the warmer weather, as a lot of people know. And while it's normal for them to attempt to enter the food premises, it's absolutely our responsibility to do everything possible to keep them out. And we have had a few challenges over the last couple of weeks, but it's important that both ourselves and MPI, who we're working very closely with, and Rentokil are confident before we reopen for the community. Because we've got to make sure we get the confidence back in the community.
When are you likely to reopen that store?
Well, we're down for Sunday because we've agreed with MPI, and again, it's the right thing to do, is about the 24 hours and then a 48 hours of no further activity. So
people understand that, Jason, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's important. You know it, but other people might not. So you have to have 24 hours of no sightings of any rat activity, and then the clock starts again for another 48 hours where no rodents are killed or captured, right?
That's
and
correct.
When you get
That's
the clean slate, you're in.
Yes. And we'll be then back to what we'll call business as usual, which is our pest management processes and controls that we have in place.
How confident are you that you're going to get there by Sunday?
The next 24 hours is key. We've obviously shown that we've got some opportunities, and that's why we're still in the situation we're in now. We do manage pests actively all the time inside New Zealand, inside every food business. We just made the step this time to make sure we did the right thing by the community, as I said last week to you, that we would close the store and make sure that we are confident with where we are in Dunedin South.
Sure, you were pretty confident that these rats were all coming in from the outside, right? That they weren't nesting in the building. But what did you find today in the walls, please?
Yeah, so we definitely knew that they were coming from outside in as an environment point of view. But today we took a step where we wanted to remove some of the cladding off some of our rear store walls, and we found some old nests in those walls. So we'll just continue to do that. The good news is that there's no signs of the live nest, which Rentokil have confirmed, as they have done through the weeks.
Right, but what that tells you is you've had previous infestations inside the supermarket that you have been oblivious to.
Inside the rear store, yes.
Yeah, so what does that mean in terms of your ongoing pest control?
Yeah, well, and it started last October. We believe we had it under control with the support of Rentokil. We were confirmed that our processes were in place. Obviously, there's some opportunity, and that's why we came out last Friday to say we've got some opportunities, and we're making those improvements, and we're doing anything within our power to make sure we could get us under control, and we've done things that we've never done before.
Jason, why did you think it was under control? Who told you it was under control?
Well, when we use our Rentokil partners, we've gone through all the processes with them, and we had obviously less and less incidents and sightings through our registers.
So did they tell you you were clear, or is that a decision you made?
No, we work with Rentokil to make sure that they are comfortable with where we are in the store, and we follow all their actions.
Okay. So if these rats are coming in from outside, this latest batch, have you identified the point of origin?
Yes, so that's what we were doing all last week when we closed. We had the opportunity to obviously check every single potential entry point, which have been closed up, and we're confident in that now. And Rentokil have also confirmed that with us.
So where's this most recent one come from then? How did it get into the supermarket?
Well, we believe that they've come in and then they've stayed in the store.
Right. So you trapped it inside, essentially, is what you're saying, is it, Jason?
Potentially, yes.
Is there a possibility that you may have to empty this entire building and fumigate it? Because I know you can't fumigate with food in there.
Correct, we can't fumigate. We'll have to work on with MPI and Rentokil to understand what the next actions are if we can't open, obviously, over the next few days, and that's what we're monitoring every single day with MPI.
So you're paying staff at the moment. Are you going to continue to do that? Are you making them take annual leave?
No, absolutely. We are paying our staff. So there's a few staff that do still come into the store to support. A lot of the staff have wanted to go to the other stores that we have in Dunedin, and we really appreciate the support and apologise to the team for the inconvenience that it's caused them. Some staff may have wanted to take annual leave, and that's their decision.
Appreciate your time.
All our team.
Thank you for joining us, Jason. That is Jason Stockel, who is from Countdown's parent company, Woolworths. It is 27 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier. Nona joins me in the studio now. OK, Nona, big day on the corporate reporting calendar. Should we go through some of the results?
Well, let's do that. But before we go through the results, I should just tell you this afternoon we had a couple of really big announcements that has seen the market surge. So I just wanted to say that Comvita has announced that it has a unsolicited takeover offer it's considering. They're not releasing any details at this stage, but the share price surged 25%.
Remind us, what are they?
They're a honey producer that exports, a lot of products around the world. Yeah. And they're not giving any details at this stage, but they say it's a credible offer. So that 25%. And then we had the Warehouse came out this afternoon as well. And that was an interesting one because they sold Torpedo 7. That's the company that they sell sporting goods through. It was a troublemaker for the company. They sold it for $1. Well,
big troublemaker. Apparently.
Yeah, it was a really big trouble. But, their share price rose 3% today. So obviously the market was happy with that. And then I've just kind of gone through the rest by order of which one the market liked the most, because there's so many. Okay, so Auckland Airport, they had a big rebound in passenger numbers. Their share price finished up 1.25% today. Genesis, well, they had a downturn in their profit. It was down 73%. But the market was still fairly happy. It rose about almost 0.5%, which is pretty good because I suppose the lake levels and there's a turnaround. The outlook was good, and that's one of the big deals this time around, as long as the outlook's good. And then we had Sky Television. They reported a 10% rise in their profits, so they finished up 1.5%. Precinct Properties, they're the folks that own the Commercial Bay property down in the bottom of Queen Street, 1.7% up. Hallensteins came out with, that they were basically having a hard time, but not to worry, they finished up 3%. Sky City was an interesting one. They ended up even. But they have another regulatory headache. We learned about that this afternoon. They're facing additional charges from the treasurer at the South Australian, government is wanting to claw back some monies that they say that they've been owed. It went through the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal said, yeah. Now what's happening is Sky City still has to go to the Supreme Court to see whether or not they have to pay penalties. That could cost them an awful lot of money. They're talking about $13 million just to cover what the Court of Appeal ruled in favor of, and perhaps another $20 million penalty, which they're going to fight. And their report wasn't too bad. By the time we've heard so much from Sky City, no one was really surprised. And Air New Zealand, which we've just heard from, they had a 39% drop in their first half result, and they finished down 0.8%. So what a busy day. Probably one of the biggest days we've had around here for a while.
Okay, overall numbers.
Yeah,
Nona.
So the top 50 index, it rose nearly 0.9%. That was obviously helped a lot by the Comvita result. 100-point gain to 11,690. The New Zealand dollar, 61.8 US cents. 94.4 Australian, 48.9 British pence. The minutes of the Fed meeting in the United States really didn't give the market any hope that they were prepared to move on interest rates anytime soon. So there you go. That's the markets today.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier there with business news. Now, to some developing news. And Taupo police have set up cordons as they search for an armed man. Students from 5 schools in the Hilltop area have been in lockdown but have now been allowed to go home. Reporter Somia Barmedi-Party joins us now. Kia ora, Somia, what's been going on?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yeah, so about 2 o'clock, this all kicked off in Taupo. A number of schools went into lockdown. Light information from police, I have to say. Basically what we know is that there was an incident unfolding. The police asked a number of schools to go into lockdown, and they just came out of lockdown about 5 o'clock. Now, we know Tauhara Primary School, Tauhara College, Taupo Intermediate, Lake Taupo Christian School and Hilltop School all were in lockdown for a couple of hours.
And have the police given any more details now about why?
Yeah, slightly more information. So there's a lot of, speculation on social media about what's happening, but what police have said is that they are looking for a person of interest, not much more information than that. They say they are having a heightened presence in the Hilltop area as they continue to look for that person. They set up cordons earlier in the afternoon. Those cordons kind of have shifted. Currently they're in place at Arthur Crescent and Invergary Road. Residents have been asked to stay inside. I spoke to a couple of residents earlier on Kittle Drive, which was one of the lockdown streets this afternoon. One of the residents actually lives near the intermediate, so she could hear over loudspeakers at the intermediate school. Parents were being asked not to come onto the school grounds. Kids were being advised that there was a lockdown, they should stay inside. Another neighbour said there were police blocking off the intersection of Kittle Drive, and he could see a dozen cars kind of outside the intermediate where parents who obviously hadn't, heard the news were waiting to pick up their kids, but obviously couldn't do that. A woman I spoke to said it was eerily quiet because, at that time of day, normally kids are rushing out of school, excited to go home, but today, not the case.
Thank you for the update, Somia. That is our reporter, Somia Barmedi-Party, there on the lockdown of a number of schools in the Taupo area. They have now been allowed to go home, the kids there. Let's get to some more of your feedback now, because there's a heap of it coming in about our interview with Air New Zealand CEO Greg Foran. This listener says, funny thing, prices only going up where there's no competition. Surely cost changes across the globe, but funny can't increase prices internationally. Glenn says the regions have unfairly been paying too much for flights forever. Only increase where they don't have competition, says Aaron. That seems to be a common theme you are all feeling. International flights are always a better deal on a non-Air New Zealand flight, this listener says. Do keep your feedback coming. It is 20 to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Don't forget you can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. It is time for the headlines. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
Air New Zealand says it has already begun to raise its domestic fares in response to rising inflation. But boss Greg Foran told Checkpoint the airline is comfortable with its current pricing across Australia and the Pacific Island routes, while prices are dropping in long-haul international routes. In Taupo, police are understood to be searching for an armed man. 5 schools went into lockdown this afternoon, but this was lifted about 5 o'clock. Police say they're looking for a person of interest. The Child Poverty Action Group says the government's focus on the cost of living isn't a commitment to ending poverty. Stats NZ has released new data showing an increase in 3 of the 9 child poverty measures for the year ending June 2023. In Northland, businesses on either side of the Brynderwyns are bracing for the 10-week closure of State Highway 1 through the hills from next Monday. Last year, the stretch shut for 58 days because of damage caused by Cyclone Gabrielle, which this year's closure will repair. Israel's parliament has voted overwhelmingly to back Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's resolution rejecting any unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state. And another rat has been caught at the Countdown Dunedin South supermarket, the 23rd in the past 12 days. Jason Stockhill from Countdown's parent company Woolworths told Checkpoint they had also found old nests in the walls. He says they'll continue to pay staff during the closure. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, all of the main routes are open. If you know differently, please text us on 2101 and you can do so hands-free. That's okay. Our next news and weather are at 6.
Ngā mihi, Evie. Auckland commuter train services have been derailed again tonight with reduced services across the city. The problem started this morning when all train services came to an abrupt stop at about 9 a.m. This time it was a signal failure, not track problems. Most lines resumed within the hour, but Auckland Transport warned of delays of up to half an hour until further notice. Now, to put it in perspective, there's been more than 1,300 train cancellations in Auckland in the last month, with track speed restrictions the most common reason for the cancellations. Well, joining us now is KiwiRail's David Gordon. Kia ora, David. What is the problem right now?
Well, let's go back to the morning issue. What happened was that the people who monitor our train control software rang into our network people just before 9 o'clock and said, the software appears to be running a little slowly. Can you do a diagnostic on the firewall? The correct answer to that is basically no, not at the moment. We won't do a diagnostic on the firewall until we're through the peak, and then we'll do it. Unfortunately, the person set out to do the right thing and ran the diagnostic. The unintended consequence of that was that the firewall dropped its connections, and that was out for the 13 minutes. It was immediately put back a moment it was known. Took 13 minutes to get it back up and running, but as your report says, the consequential impact of that is that it flows through to delays in the morning. The trains that were running at the time were all delayed. Everything will start running again by 9:45.
Okay, David, can I just get you to pause there, please? When you say the system went down, do you mean the entire signalling system on the lines went out?
Yeah, so we lost detection of the signalling system. So when that happens, the system is configured to what is called fail-safe. Now, that doesn't mean it fails. It doesn't fail, but what it means is that when you have a failure of that nature, the lights go red.
So the whole network comes to a stop as a safety precaution. So when you say that someone noticed your system was running slowly and wanted you to run some diagnostics on the firewall, were you being hacked?
No, we weren't. The person that rang us is the software engineers that look after our train control system. We have a protocol in place that if there's anything happening, they'll ring our network people and ascertain whether there's an issue with the networks. So it was simply.
Why wasn't the network up to scratch, David? Why did you have this issue in the first place?
Well, it would appear that there was nothing wrong with the network. The issue happened when the person ran the diagnostic on the firewall, and that is what brought the system down.
Is your system that fragile?
No, it's pretty normal that it's pretty normal if the firewall is getting touched, then it will make assumptions as to whether that's a malicious act or not. So it is just a genuine error by a software engineer who should have left it alone.
When you say the signalling system was out for 13 minutes, why are people experiencing delays and reduced service right now then?
Well, there is always a cascade effect on that. So the timetable gets a little bit out of sequence, and people, the drivers, etc., may be in the wrong place. I can't comment as to why it is still happening now. That's with the train operator themselves. But I do respect the fact that if you have a disruption in the timetable, it takes time to settle down. 9
hours, though? And is that on you?
Well, the initial fault is quite clearly KiwiRail's. We absolutely own accountability for the initial fault.
And the cascade, as you called it?
The cascade is actually something that is shared between ourselves and the above rail operator. And I'm not in a position to say whether they're beneficial or not. Auckland One Rail are a very good global operator. I'm sure they've done their very best to avoid it.
David, why can't you seem to get it together? KiwiRail, I mean. There's been so many cancellations and a number of them are due to speed restrictions on the track. Now this, people can't rely on the train service. I mean, why can't you get it together?
Well, it's a little bit unfair. We're 2/3 of the way through an entire rebuild of the network. Heat restrictions are a fact of life in any metro network. In any network around the world. Those are down to a very small number now, and speed restrictions are associated with the rebuild. Some of the speed restrictions we're doing is like a new road. You don't run at full speed across it. So what's happening at the moment is not good for the passengers. We've had a run of things, and it's not good enough. We're not running away from that. But to say, why can't you get together, I think is a little bit of an unfair characterisation.
Thanks for your time, David. We really appreciate it. David Gordon from KiwiRail there. 2101 on text. Let us know your thoughts on that, particularly if you use the trains. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Now, last night we brought you the story about new updated EFTPOS machines, which are making it a little more awkward for customers to say no to adding a tip. The new machines prompt customers on a brightly lit screen to tip an extra 5, 10 or 15%. In small print, you can opt out. We received a huge amount of feedback from you, so our reporter Felix Walton hit the streets for some of your reaction.
In central Auckland, diners have been noticing the new option when paying for their meals. Liam Crawford says it's an awkward question.
I think it's definitely trying to play on people's morals and all that, and just almost make you feel bad for saying no, so you just say yes, just so you don't look like I don't know what words I'm allowed to say, make you look like a dick.
In the United States, tips are included in the minimum wage for restaurant staff, but that isn't the case in Aotearoa. So Tim Mace wonders why Kiwi staff would need tips in the first place.
If we're not paying the server enough money, then why is the price of the food so expensive? I thought that the price of the service was meant to be included in the price of the food. So are they double dipping, or is this just a sign of the times?
Hospitality worker Dee Harris says a lot of her co-workers skip over the tip screen to avoid embarrassing their customers.
Quite a few of the servers will just go no. I think they feel like a lot of us Kiwis aren't really used to the idea of tipping, so, aren't really trying to force it, which is it's nice because it gives the option to patrons.
But Hospitality New Zealand Chief Executive Steve Armitage says the new EFTPOS machines are a response to changing technology.
With technology advancements, people don't carry cash as much as they used to in the past, and might not necessarily on a whim or in the moment have a note or some coins to pass on to somebody. So, this is another example of where technology and advancements is just changing the way that these things operate.
But he says the customers shouldn't feel pressured to tip.
I think, very much needs to be left to the customer. If it's something that's a little bit more discreet and provides an option for the customer to select, then that's a much better way to go.
Some diners worry New Zealand could adopt the United States tipping culture. Anusha Chapati says she doesn't want it to become the norm.
It should be a choice, but it shouldn't be something like a compulsory thing. I know I've been to the States and they're like, you have to tip, and I forgot to tip because it's not a normal thing here, and they look at you as if so it should be a choice.
And this shopper agrees.
I think it's a bit ridiculous considering we're not the US and we don't have a tipping culture. I think it's nice to have the option, but it shouldn't be automatically jumping to 15%, and it's nice to be able to give that little extra if you think your server did a great job.
Azerbaijani tourist Murad Alaverdiev says tipping is the norm in his country and the rest of the world should do it too.
Should be normal. In my country, I'm from Azerbaijan. In my country, we are paying around 20%. This is very normal, and we have to, for inspiring the people. And this is our society psychology about the tips. We have to take care of the guys who are taking care of us.
Steve Armitage says tipping is becoming more common in New Zealand.
But I think it's something that Kiwis are much more open to than they used to be. But clearly, in the current environment, we're all very aware of, each dollar is very prized at the moment. We're being very careful around how we're spending any discretionary money that we might have. So we can understand why people would have some hesitancy around it.
He says the new EFTPOS machines are a logical way to reward good service, but he says staff should make customers feel comfortable saying no.
9 minutes to 6 now. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let's get to some more of your comments on the interview with Greg Foran. This person says, Greg gets the gold for corporate flannel, responding to whether he would raise prices as fine-tuning the experience. What the beep? Livid of Thorndon, that person signs off. Another says, just watch the regional centres get hammered at the expense of the main centres. Will this ever change? We don't want an experience, says another listener. We want to get from A to B as cheap and as quickly as possible. Several comments on the subject of climate emergency, and perhaps less of us should be travelling via air. Happy to hear airfares are increasing. Climate emergency, nobody takes it seriously. Air travel is hugely polluting. If fewer people travel, the better for the world, this person says. And this one, before we move on, Air New Zealand will put up domestic prices because they have a monopoly to the regions at least. 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It's the Far North's time to shine, with a popular talent show making a comeback. After a 6-year hiatus, Far North's Got Talent will literally provide a stage for budding entertainers to strut their stuff. The event, which is supported by the New Zealand Music Commission, will have several audition rounds with coaching and help from mentors, with finalists selected to compete in the grand final in Kaitaia in June. One of the organisers, Boise Tāwhara, is hoping it will be a confidence boost for young locals in particular.
Personally, I'm expecting good things. I've signed my 2 grandchildren up. One's going to turn 9 tomorrow. The other one's just turned 5. So I'm just excited to be pushing them into the stage.
Hey, what are their talents?
So one of them would be singing, and the other one, I think, the youngest one, the 5-year-old, will be a singer as well. But I think she's going to come in with some sort of a freestyle kickboxing / singing, dancing sort of routine. Yeah, we'll play around with it.
Sounds awesome. And what kind of talent can you bring to this competition? Can you do anything?
I think it's anything this year. So that's why it's my sister's the one of the major drivers with it. My sister Micah, my younger sister. So she was the one that suggested kickboxing, because that's what I'm doing with. I've got a kids kickboxing program at the moment. So I thought, why not? Something different. So yeah, we're just going to try and throw that out there, and I'm going to let everyone know what we're putting forward from our family, and then hopefully that might inspire other people in the community to be creative as well and just offer something. Just step on up and offer something, whatever it is. Just have fun with it.
What does the road to the grand final look like? Like, do you have to go into some heats or some early competitions to get to the big stage? How does it work?
Yeah, so there's an audition process, but usually it starts off with auditions. And then if you make the finals, so there's usually around about 20 that will make the finals in both the junior and senior divisions. And then they go through to the workshops, which are choreography, vocal lessons, stage performance lessons, dance lessons, all that sort of stuff. So the spin on it this year is you just register. We're taking 80 registrations, and then we go into the workshop. So everyone's going to get a chance to have that professional development before their audition.
So I understand you've attracted some big names in the past. Who have you had through in other competitions?
The competitions have changed over the years. So it started off just being a singing competition, and then there were these other events where I used to run events for bands. So some of the Teeks was a member in one of the bands that come from Taipa. So we used to go out to all the small communities. The Far North is really well spread out. So I was just trying to find ways to bring all the artists to a central location, and then bring all the audience to one central location to showcase all this amazing talent that we had. So Teeks used to take centre stage from the Taipa Area School Band, and there were quite a few amazing musicians in that band. Who else? Now that you put me in that, it's hard to think of the names.
But you could discover another big name.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, that's what it's all about. Yeah.
So what are you hoping?
Really,
what are you hoping to achieve with it?
It's more just to try and give our young people an opportunity to explore their creativeness and to embrace it and then take it as far as they can and just enjoy life being in that creative space. So that's why we target it for everyone. It's not always about the top. The top 4 or the finalists. We try and make it rewarding for everyone.
It takes a bit of guts to put yourself out there, especially when you're a young person. So, there might be a few people who are a bit nervous about it. What would you say to them?
I think it's nerves. It's all part of it. And I think the only way to learn how to face your fears and to conquer your nerves is just to get out there and confront whatever it is that you're fearful of. That's just go out there and have fun. And so what we're also trying to do is we're trying to encourage parents to push their children or their grandchildren into those spaces that might be challenging or confronting for them. And once you're in that space, then you might realize that what you thought was uncomfortable wasn't as uncomfortable as you thought.
So how's the winner chosen? Do you have a judging panel, or do the people watching get a vote? How does it work?
So there is a judging panel, and so those judges are selected. They usually carry some sort of reputation with them, so they've got good credibility within the music performing arts industry. So that's we usually pull that judging panel together close to the finals. And it all goes from there. But there is also a public vote. So there's the crowd favourite. So that's where the audience can participate in voting as well.
And that was Boise Tāwhara. And if you think you're up for the challenge and you live up north and you want some more details about the contest, you can check out their Facebook page. It's all there. Let's get to some more of your feedback now. Still a lot of it coming in on Air New Zealand. Its profits are down and they're going to be raising domestic airfares. They're already started. Someone here says prices going up with Air New Zealand, so can we expect more reliability? So many flights are cancelled that it won't be worth flying if the prices go up as well. Well, Greg Foran said they had some of the best rates for reliability. Another person says so much nauseating corporate speak from Air New Zealand. This one, Air New Zealand is hugely polluting. If fewer people travel, it's better. Don't live in Queenstown, another listener says, used to be able to get to Auckland for $129 each way. Now, if you haven't booked way in advance, you are $350 plus each way. Another says Greg is out of touch, lower prices and let more of us fly. We are a country with a small population with high expectations, says this listener, Matt from Dunedin. He says, I love what Air New Zealand does for New Zealand and its people. We don't know how lucky we are. On the subject of tips, which is another one that's got you all going, this listener says, if you have an issue with a small percentage tip because it makes you feel awkward, don't eat at a high-end restaurant. Another says the new tipping FPOS machines are emotional blackmail, pure and simple. Consumer New Zealand should be onto this hard and fast. Consumer choice is vital. I think you still get to choose. It's just some people find it terribly awkward. On the delays on the commuter trains this evening as a result of a problem earlier this morning, KiwiRail said it was some problem with the firewall. This person says diagnostics on the firewall sounds like BS to me.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Tēnā tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. A Dunedin teacher who stabbed her partner 22 times while he was in the bath apologised to her children and transferred them money before calling the police. Carol Code pleaded guilty to the murder of her partner, 58-year-old director Mark Henry Willis, last year. Crown Prosecutor Richard Smith says it was a brutal murder and she ignored his pleas to stop.
Having committed what, in my respectful submission, has to be regarded as a brutal and cruel murder, the defendant then had the lucidity of thought or wherewithal to contact her own family, her children, and apologise and transfer a large sum of money to their bank account.
Carol Code has been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 11 years behind bars at the High Court in Dunedin today. Parents of Taupo school students are relieved a lengthy lockdown has lifted. Police are still searching for what they describe as a person of interest in the suburb of Hilltop. Kettle Drive resident Simone was on the phone to an RNZ reporter the moment the lockdown lifted at 5 o'clock. She could hear a loudspeaker at nearby Taupo Intermediate School announcing there was a lockdown.
Oh, just to their school that they're in lockdown and the parents not to come on the premises. It looks like they've just been let out. I'm relieved because I can see students walking, so my child will be home very soon.
At least 5 schools in the area were locked down from about 2:30. The police are still advising residents to stay inside while they continue their search. The Minister for Child Poverty Reduction says the Coalition's commitment to reducing the cost of living will also bring child poverty numbers down. Stats NZ has released data that shows 23,000 more children are going without household essentials. That's just one of 3 child poverty measures to increase in the latest data set. Louise Upston says a new approach that tackles the cost crisis is needed to end poverty.
Providing tax relief, improving housing supply, making sure that those interest rates start to come down for those who have mortgages, making childcare more affordable, a range of things that we need to do that will have an impact on these child poverty rates.
Louise Upston says the government's top priority is reducing living costs, and that will ensure those struggling are looked after. Air New Zealand says it's already begun to raise its domestic fares, blaming inflation. The airline has today announced a 39% drop in profit in the last 6 months of last year, making a net profit of $129 million. Chief Executive Greg Foran told Checkpoint it can't keep absorbing such a high level of inflation and needs to start passing some of it on. Mr Foran was unable to say which routes would see fee hikes or by how much, but he says it won't be a blanket price increase. The Department of Internal Affairs is still hunting for people involved in a text phishing scam targeting millions of New Zealanders. The accused men, aged 18 and 19 from the UK, have appeared in the Auckland District Court facing 22 charges each. The scam would ask victims to provide personal details, and the offenders would steal up to $100,000 after gaining access to their bank accounts. The department's manager of digital messaging and systems, Joe Teo, says the arrests came as a relief.
It's a feeling of elation and the combination of a lot of hard work, working with both the mobile network operators, even the banks, and just being able to just piece that all together. Yeah, it's great that we can get this piece of work done for the New Zealand public as well.
Joe Teo says it's targeting and investigating 2 other people it believes are involved in the scam. Large parts of Australia are sweltering through extreme heat today, sparking dangerous fire conditions. The ABC's Chelsea Hetherington reports.
Total fire bans are in place across large parts of Victoria and Tasmania, where residents are facing hot, dry and windy conditions. Temperatures above 35 degrees are forecast in parts of Tasmania, along with low humidity. In Victoria, the heat is set to soar into the 40s in some places, including Mildura in the state's northwest, ahead of a gusty cool change and thunderstorms. There's also extreme fire danger for South Australia's east and the Western Australia coast around Perth. WA is also bracing for ex-tropical cyclone Lincoln to redevelop this weekend.
A lone rat has been found dead in a trap on Ulva Island, one of the country's few pest-free open-air sanctuaries. The island is just under 800 metres off the coast of Rakiura, Stewart Island. DOC's operations manager, Jennifer Ross, says they'll set up biosecurity checks, put more rangers on the ground and do more rat detection dog work. The island gets 1 or 2 pests each year. It was first declared pest-free in 1997. And Boeing says the head of its 737 MAX aircraft program is to leave the company less than 2 months after a cabin panel blew out during a passenger flight. The firm has been facing scrutiny since the incident in January. With the details, Molly Parella from the BBC.
In a staff memo, Boeing said Ed Clark's departure after 18 years at the company was part of a wider shake-up aimed at improving quality and safety. He oversaw the factory in Washington that produced the plane involved in the blowout. A door panel blew off an Alaska Airlines flight shortly after takeoff, leaving a gaping hole. Investigators say it may have been missing 4 bolts. Miraculously, there were no serious injuries. Nearly 200 planes were grounded. Safety campaigners have been calling for new leadership at Boeing since the incident, but trouble with the 737 MAX model began several years ago. A different version of the plane was involved in 2 fatal crashes in 2018 and 2019.
That's the news.
Kia ora, Emile Donovan here from The Night Show. Last night we had the New York comedian Caitlin Bailey on to talk about her one-woman show about sex work and prostitution.
New Zealand really set an example for the world, decriminalising prostitution in 2003. I'm really here to learn from the incredible sex worker rights advocates and folks that have made that happen, and hope to take good news back to the US about how it works here.
Tune in for tonight's program from 7 till midnight here on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Northland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Cloudy periods with isolated showers, possibly heavy and thundery later tomorrow. From Auckland to Kapiti Coast, including the central high country. Showers spreading south today, clearing to fine tomorrow from the afternoon. Gisborne, cloud clearing today, scattered rain tomorrow. Hawke's Bay, Waded Upper and Wellington, fine today. A shower or 2 north of Dannevirke later tomorrow. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Westland mainly fine. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, except Dakiura, Stewart Island, fine but low cloud developing in the east this evening, clearing tomorrow morning, high cloud increasing later tomorrow. Fiordland and Dakiura, cloudy with occasional drizzle mainly about the fjords. And for Rekohu, Chatham Islands, cloudy. It is 7 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā, e ho no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Northland businesses are in for more than 2 months of disruption from Monday as repair works are carried out on a crucial link damaged during Cyclone Gabrielle last year. Everyone Checkpoint spoke with agrees the work on the slip-prone section of State Highway 1 over the Brynderwyns is necessary, but they're still bracing for a hit and in one case, closure. Our reporter Jimmy Ellingham and cameraman Nick Monroe have the story.
Sure, it's a windy spot, but the view from Matt Lang's workplace out to the ocean and towards the Whangarei Heads can't be beaten. However, for about 10 weeks from Monday until May the 12th, as about 10 kilometres of the highway is fixed, Mr Lang will have to close his Altura Coffee Company cart.
Going to take a direct impact to me. I'm going to be shut down the whole time basically. Due to licensing issues, I'm not able to go to another location, so it's going to mean a complete closure of my business.
The road will open for a week over Easter, but otherwise Mr Lang has no choice other than taking the hit.
It's going to definitely take a strain on the costings for the year, but we just have to work through, and hopefully there's some support out in the community that will help us.
He's had the business for 5 years, through COVID and last year's cyclone, which forced the Brynderwyns Road to close for 58 days. He says he's had great support from customers to his spot near a popular lookout and hopes other businesses receive that too.
Hoping that with the shutdown it doesn't affect too many of the local businesses in the local community, as the hills provide the main leeway into the communities, and it provides a lot of customer for the local businesses, so I'm hoping it doesn't affect them too much.
Alternative routes take heavy traffic over towards Dargaville, but other motorists will head east and, along the way, skirt through Waipu, although they won't enter the town centre. At the Waipu Scottish Migration Museum, Kath Barber and Lorraine Lloyd are preparing for a quiet period.
We know it has to be done because we do want good permanent access through the Brynderwyns, but it is definitely going to affect our business here.
Bring a lot of people through town, not necessarily in town. It makes us like a big intersection because they come off the highway and then come into town and then go straight out.
Straight out without spending, although it comes after a busy summer. Waipu ticks along nicely just off the main highway, but increased traffic has its downsides. Mrs. Barber says she'll find it hard to get out of her driveway, while Mrs. Lloyd says extra travel time means her weekly girls' catch-up in Kaiwaka won't happen.
That won't happen because it'll add an hour and a half to my travel, round trip, without getting stuck behind something. So yeah, 9 or 10 weeks. I'm sure we'll try hard to get somewhere for coffee, but it's annoying, but you know.
At Industry Vintage Antiques and Collectibles, Raina Riley, one of the business's owners, hopes for better this year than last year's closure.
The work needs to be done. That's very important, just to keep the arterial route open. But for businesses like ours, it's going to be tough. Last year, February was practically a zero month, or not even break-even month for us. So we are dreading the time to come.
Missing some of the busy summer period has long-lasting effects too.
And usually the winter months are the quiet months. This is the time when we make the hay, and that will last us through the winter season.
Like many others, shop worker Lucy Bowie also doubts the traffic passing nearby will stop.
It's quite hard on the town too, because crossing the road, just having your normal life is, it's quite problematic, because people don't drive as though they're driving in your little town. They drive because they want to get somewhere.
Down the road, on the bypass, Little Red Coffee owner Jackie Mewett is expecting an uptick in trade as more people stop for refreshments.
I'm looking forward to it. Weekdays should be nice and busy. We've got State Highway 1 coming through. We're in a really good spot in town, and I think the trade should be good.
Mrs. Mewett's only worry is people might be travelling now so they can avoid the Brynderwyns closure, although that didn't happen last year.
The closures were totally sweet. Like, we had nice busy days. No complaints.
On the other side of the hills, Kaiwaka Cheese Shop Assistant Director Crystal Faber also worries that in heavy traffic, drivers won't stop.
Usually when the traffic is very slow, people don't stop anymore. They just want to keep going to the next destination. So, I don't know. We'll have to see how it goes.
At least people will still go through to town, unlike last year.
Last time the traffic went around Kaiwaka, so we missed a lot of traffic, a lot of customers because of that. So hopefully this time it will be a bit better, but it does affect us.
Mrs. Faber says the extra kilometres delivery drivers have to travel over alternative routes mean increased costs too. The work was originally going to start on February the 7th, but was delayed after an outcry from businesses.
It's been another day of disruptions for public transport users in Auckland, with all train lines grinding to a halt for a time because of an infrastructure issue. All trains are now operating on reduced frequency this afternoon. Auckland Transport says rail commuters will have to put up with delays for the next few years as work ramps up to accommodate the city rail link. And as Maya Ingo reports, some commuters are at their wits' end.
Frustrating, unreliable and annoying. Words never far from the lips of early morning train commuters outside the Britomart and Newmarket stations.
Actually, I'm quite tired of this issue because you trust the trains, you trust the service, and it's not reliable. And you know what, it's really stressful to come to work at a certain hour and you're ready, and you arrive to the station and the train is not there.
I don't think it's okay, especially seeing a lot of people stranded waiting for the trains, and then people just can't get home on time.
They've been cancelled twice this month from memory, and so I ended up late for work like 2 days in a row because I had to take the bus instead.
I take the Eastern Line. The service has been stopped for 9 months to do some maintenance. People would expect that the quality is better.
The commuters say it shouldn't be this way.
I would like a more frequent service and at least not being late and prompt communication.
Just deliver on what you say, right? Like, if you have a schedule, try and stick to it as best as possible. I think it's also the communication around it. You find out 5 minutes before you've actually got to get onto the train that the train's been delayed or cancelled.
I came back from Japan a couple of months ago, and so their transport system is my ideal. If you miss one, it's all good because it just comes in the next 3 minutes.
Others have just accepted that delays or cancellations are the norm for Auckland's troubled train network.
Is there much that we can really do? Not really. As always, it can always be better, but
yeah, it's just one of those things that everyone's got to deal with, I think.
People who get in a panic are like the people who will try and get one car length ahead on the motorway. What difference is it going to make?
Auckland Transport's General Manager of Public Transport, Stacey van der Putten, says KiwiRail has resolved the issue with overheating rail lines that caused much of last week's problems. But with further work being done to accommodate the City Rail link, disruptions will be inevitable for the next few years.
There will be disruption, it will be communicated. Every now and then there will be unplanned disruption. That's the nature of running an operational network, and we will do our best to be able to communicate that effectively and efficiently and provide alternative services to our customers.
Commuters are already changing their plans to work around disruptions.
I come in from Meadowbank, which is quite close, but it was closed for a whole year. So I have to modify my customs.
I try to bike where I can because that's more reliable. But I mean, it's such a good service when it does work. Just wish it worked more.
And it's 16 minutes after 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The High Court hearing is over, and now it's a waiting game for WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. The 2-day hearing in a British High Court is a last-ditch effort by Assange to avoid extradition to the US to face charges of spying. 2 High Court judges are now considering whether a full appeal will be granted. The ABC's Europe correspondent Steve Cannan reports.
On a rainy day in London, hundreds of supporters of Julian Assange gathered outside the High Court for the second and final day of hearings, as he seeks leave to appeal his extradition to the US. Among those supporters was Andrew Wilkie, the independent MP who last week successfully moved the motion in the Australian Parliament to recognise the importance of bringing the proposed extradition to an end.
Look, I thought it was very important that an Australian parliamentarian come to London, at least for today, to bear witness at what's going on in that courtroom. It's even more important, I think, that there's an Australian parliamentarian here to bear witness, given the events of just last week, when a thumping majority of the House of Representatives voted in favour of the motion that this matter must be brought to an end.
Inside the court, lawyers for the US argued that Julian Assange was not just practising ordinary journalism. Instead, he was conspiring with Chelsea Manning to unlawfully obtain classified material and trying to recruit others to do the same, including hackers. They also made the case that the WikiLeaks founder put informants' lives at risk by publishing the unredacted names of people in authoritarian countries who had been sharing information with the US. Outside the court, Andrew Wilkie, himself a former intelligence official, disputed that argument.
So that's just a furphy by the US government now to say that Julian Assange put people at risk and perhaps even had people killed. The official inquiries say that is not the case.
Yesterday, lawyers for Julian Assange made the case that the relevant treaty prohibited extradition to the US for political offences. Today, lawyers for the US argued that legislation introduced in the UK in 2003 omitted that exemption. Claire Dobbin KC, acting for the US, said Mr Assange was being prosecuted for his actions, not his political opinions. Jennifer Robinson, a member of Assange's legal team, told AM outside the court there is a compelling case for an appeal to be granted.
I think the arguments put forward by our side were incredibly strong and compelling. The court was clearly engaged with them, particularly on the freedom of speech arguments. We heard our counsel give a robust defence of both Chelsea Manning's Protected Act, that was protected by free speech as a whistleblower, and that Julian, in receiving and publishing that information, has engaged like the rest of the media.
A decision from the 2 High Court judges over granting an appeal could come within weeks. The US Justice Department was contacted for comment.
Britain has imposed sanctions on officials at the prison where Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny died on Friday. It says the 6 prison bosses of the Arctic penal colony are responsible for the brutal treatment he suffered in his final months. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has called on Russia to release Navalny's body to his family and is urging a full and transparent investigation into his death. The ABC's Rachel Mealy reports.
A chorus of anger, one that's unlikely to be resonating inside the Kremlin. Western leaders have expressed their outrage over the death of Alexei Navalny. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says they're acting in any way they can.
Mr. Speaker, the whole House will join me in sending our deepest condolences to the family of Alexei Navalny. He died for a cause to which he dedicated his whole life, freedom, and to return home knowing that Putin had already tried to have him killed was one of the most courageous acts of our time. Together with our allies, we are considering all options to hold Russia and Putin to account, and this morning we sanctioned those running the prison where Alexei Navalny's body still lies.
The sanctions will apply to 6 individuals who are in charge of the Arctic penal colony where Alexei Navalny died. They'll be banned from the UK and have their assets frozen. The British opposition leader Keir Starmer added his voice to those condemning Russian President Vladimir Putin.
I'm sure the whole House will join me in sharing our disgust at the death of Alexei Navalny, who, as the Prime Minister said, died because of his efforts to expose the corruption of the Putin regime.
Countries in the European Union have also agreed on a new package of sanctions targeting individuals and businesses who've assisted Russia in its war against Ukraine. The United States is expected to announce more sanctions later this week to coincide with the 2nd anniversary of Russia's invasion. Russians in exile are mourning the loss of Alexei Navalny, who offered them hope of a better future for their homeland. Anastasia Panchenko used to work in Navalny's office. She now lives in Georgia, south of Russia.
He turned my life on its head. He changed a lot within me. But the main thing he taught me was love and empathy for people. I want people all over the world to understand that Russians aren't the enemies of the world. Just like people across the world, we hate Putin, his dictatorship and his gang.
She says she'll throw her support behind Alexei Navalny's widow Yulia, who has declared she'll take her husband's place opposing the autocratic rule of Vladimir Putin.
Yulia Navalny is our new hope. She has taken upon herself all of Alexei Navalny's political capital. I think she's the lawful, legitimate leader of the opposition. We very much support her and think that if there were real elections right now, Yulia Navalny would become president of Russia.
Another of Navalny's former colleagues, Semyon Kochkin, says Navalny's death is galvanizing opposition voices.
We always thought of Alexei as the person who'd tell us what to do. He'd make the plan and we'd carry it out. Now there's no one who's going to make that plan for us, so we need to start doing it for ourselves.
From Georgia, the activists are phoning Russian voters, urging them to vote against Vladimir Putin or destroy their ballots as a sign of protest during next month's presidential election.
To the Middle East, and Israel says there are promising early signs of progress of a new deal for Hamas to release the remaining hostages held in Gaza. Earlier this week, Israeli War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz said if the captives were not released by Ramadan, Israel would begin its threatened assault on the overcrowded border city of Rafah. The BBC's special correspondent Fergal Keane has been hearing the testimony of those caught up in the raid and a warning some listeners may find parts of this report upsetting.
The hostage rescue was a rare success for the Special Forces teams trying to save the 130 people, including 2 children, still believed held by Hamas.
Early this morning, at 1:49 a.m., Israeli commandos carried out a hostage rescue mission deep inside Rafah in Gaza.
The cost of that rescue in Palestinian lives was high. At least 72 people reported killed. Researchers from the Palestinian Center for Human Rights in Gaza say 27 children and 22 women were among the dead.
Today is Monday, the 12th of February 2024.
This doctor with the aid group Médecins Sans Frontières protected her children with her own body when the bombing began at around 1:45 a.m. When the sun rose and illuminated the area around her home, she was horrified by what she discovered outside. She's asked to remain anonymous.
On our home, when we were checking, I found pieces of human flesh. We found a whole lower limb belonged to a human that we don't know who he is.
It is in the stories of individual families that the human cost of this raid is most clearly understood. Nawara al-Najjar is a mother of 6 children and is 6 months pregnant. She was cut by flying shrapnel. Her 32-year-old husband, Abed al-Rahman, was mortally wounded.
When I woke up after being wounded, I started screaming with pain. When this happened, I opened my eyes. I saw my husband in his last breath. When my children saw him, they were screaming, "Don't leave us."
The couple's 13-year-old daughter, Malak, lost her eye after being hit by a splinter of shrapnel.
I was not treated immediately. Only after 3 days was my surgery performed. I was injured in the eye and I was shot in my waist. What is my fault that this happened to me? I'm in pain, pain, pain. I lost my dad. Enough.
The Israelis accuse Hamas of using civilians as human shields. A military spokesman said the IDF works to mitigate harm to civilians. Military lawyers advise commanders on how to meet their international legal obligations. And the IDF analyses and takes into account the expected military advantage and likely collateral harm to civilians. Survivors, like the MSF doctor, fear that the horror of February 12th will soon be forgotten amid new attacks.
I know that this message means nothing to a lot of people and will change nothing. To be honest, the one who died is the one who's lucky. The one who lived to suffer again and again and again, who the one have been cursed and abandoned by all people all around the world.
Shacket, bed rotting and ick are just a few of the new words which have made it into this year's version of the dictionary.com. The BBC's Alfie Havisham finds out how the new words are decided and who's responsible for them.
And you look so beautiful, Barbie. Thanks, Barbie. I feel so beautiful. So do I.
This is the best. Barbiecore, a new word to help us explain our playful and pink wardrobes. It's just one of 327 added to America's biggest online dictionary, which it says spans the galaxy of modern life. But how do they choose? Grant Barrett is head of lexicology.
We look at social media, we look at print media, broadcast media, and when we come across language that seems novel to us, we look and see if it's got depth to it. It's funny, there's a kind of a catch-22 when it comes to these words. If you've heard of the word as a regular user, you're like, oh, I've heard of that. Why are they adding that now? Well, that's kind of late. And if you haven't heard of it, you're like, oh, that's a flash in the pan. Why did they add that?
Dictionaries are thought to be more than 4,000 years old and are constantly tinkered with to explain moments that we couldn't quite put our finger on, like getting the ick.
I personally, and I think all the boys agree, would want to know. Obviously, when we were up there making the food, and she's basically said that she's got the ick.
That's a sudden feeling of disgust for someone you are dating, usually coming out of nowhere. There are serious additions too. Global boiling, fire tornadoes and super fog can all help explain the effects of climate change, while landlords shooting up rent prices for excessive cash will now be known as greedflation. Mr. Barrett told me his favourite new addition.
When we look at stuff like girl dinner, where girl dinner represents the tendency of young women to go for the easy-to-make comfort food, the stuff that is a kind of an odd mix of items on a plate, but every single one of them is something that satisfies.
And there are more reasons than that to want a girl dinner. Young women are the #1 source of new words, playing a much bigger role in language than originally thought.
It spreads the same way that fashion does, that jokes do, that good ideas do. And so it's all about the strong relationships that people have. And young women tend to have strong in groups. Because young women tend not to be socially or financially or politically powerful, it's easy to look down upon them. And yet, there they are, making language change again and again and again.
Ko te kaupapa tuatahi o Pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up, kicks off the Super Rugby season with Crusaders flanker Tom Christie. Chuck on a shacket, shake off the bed rot and tune in.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Te mātātou, I'm Evie Ashton.
Air New Zealand is blaming inflation for its decision to start raising domestic airfares, but isn't naming the routes affected. Chief Executive Greg Foran told Checkpoint the airline can't keep absorbing increasing costs. Police in Taupo are still searching for what they describe as a person of interest in the suburb of Hilltop, and residents are being told to stay indoors. At least 5 schools were put into lockdown for more than 2 hours this afternoon. And firefighters have finished dealing with a scrub blaze that